One evening, as I sat at our table, I meticulously reviewed my daughter Amanda's medical records. Amanda was on the verge of starting kindergarten, so she had undergone a comprehensive examination by her pediatrician. Meanwhile, my wife had left her school forms carelessly scattered across the table. While glancing lazily at them, my attention was drawn to a particular letter that unexpectedly signaled the end of my marriage. In the blood type column, there it was, the letter A. I froze, utterly clueless for a good 10 seconds. My thoughts raced as I quickly retrieved 2 sheets of paper from our medical records, a record of our blood types. And to my disbelief, everything matched my memory perfectly. Last summer, both my wife and I had donated blood to the Red Cross, receiving official receipts stating our respective blood types. Here they were, explicitly recorded on paper. Mine was B, while hers was O. In light of this undeniable evidence, I faced the harsh reality. Amanda couldn't possibly be my biological daughter. If my wife was indeed her mother, and I had personally witnessed Lola giving birth, then it could only mean that someone with blood type A had to be her father. As the kids were peacefully sleeping and Lola was absorbed in her TV show upstairs, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and ventured into the backyard, my mind consumed with the contemplation of the state of my marriage. Looking back, I would have described our relationship as average, nothing too extraordinary, with its fair share of ups and downs. During our courtship and early years of marriage, Lola and I were deeply and passionately in love. Our physical connection was innate and pervasive, transcending the boundaries of the bedroom. We were inseparable, constantly entwined in each other's arms, effortlessly expressing our affection through simple gestures like holding hands, walking side by side, and gentle caresses whenever we passed each other. Naturally, though, as time progressed, that passionate spark began to diminish. Isn't it a common phenomenon in most marriages? Yet now confronted with irrefutable proof of her infidelity, every belief I held about the solidity of our marriage was rocked to its core. I questioned myself, trying to understand what caused this transformation. Did it happen gradually, or was it an abrupt change? It felt like both. The erosion of our intimacy was initially subtle, progressing quietly. However, around 6 years ago, a few months prior to Amanda's conception, something peculiar occurred. Lola, who had always been warm and affectionate, began acting strangely. One evening, she arrived home unusually late from work, briefly exchanged a tender kiss with me, and rushed into the shower, avoiding any further contact with me for the remainder of the night. The following morning, she remained distant and cold. But that night, she transformed into a completely different person. Home early, she prepared a special dinner, tucked me into bed earlier than usual, and made love to me with a fervor and passion that I believed had long since faded. We passionately embraced each other before drifting off to sleep, and Lola repeatedly professed her undying love for me. For the next few months, we experienced numerous intimate and passionate episodes. Then, as suddenly as it had commenced, the coldness returned. She would come home late from work, not uttering a single word to me, swiftly disappearing into the shower. For almost 2 months, I barely recognized the woman I had married. Lola exhibited a contrasting combination of affection and distance, attentiveness and preoccupation, patience and irritability. I repeatedly asked her if something was amiss, if there were any problems either between us or at work. Her only response was her own uncertainty, hesitatingly admitting her anxiety to Tim and apologizing for it. After about 3 months, things eventually settled down, but it was far from the joyful beginnings of our marriage. Although Lola's mood swings became less frequent, she no longer displayed the same level of affection, and her desire for intimacy gradually dissipated. Our lovemaking became a rarity, occurring no more than once a week, and often only when I firmly insisted. Any subtle suggestion, such as proposing a night of intimacy, was immediately met with sharp rejection. I had to confront her about the prolonged gaps between our passionate encounters. Lola reluctantly engaged in lovemaking thereafter, but it was evident that she was merely fulfilling an obligation. was this melancholic pattern characteristic of all marriages. I couldn't say as mine was all I knew carnally. Naturally, I wondered what could be happening, pondering the possibility of infidelity. However, shortly after, Lola became pregnant, and the shared excitement over our future child and the joy of having our wonderful Amanda overshadowed most of my concerns about our relationship. With Amanda's birth, we were both engulfed in a state of constant exhaustion, making Lola's lack of interest in carnal intimacy more understandable, although still dissatisfying to me. Then, when Amanda turned 3, Lola found herself pregnant once again, and we welcomed John into our lives just after Amanda's 4th birthday. Thus, Tim and Lola, once passionate lovers and devoted spouses, transformed into Tim and Lola, parents to 2 delightful yet overwhelming children. We both cherished our children dearly, but despite my current revelation and profound unhappiness with our marriage and our almost non-existent intimate life, at the time I was completely oblivious to it. If that was indeed the case, then I concluded that all couples with young children traverse this phase. Now, with the shocking revelation that my daughter was not biologically mine, the events from 6 years ago no longer seemed mysterious. Lola must have begun an affair during that time. It provided a logical explanation for her distant behavior and sudden rush to the shower. The subsequent passionate lovemaking and warmth may have been born out of guilt, or perhaps, if I were feeling generous, her attempt to maintain the facade of a happy marriage while continuing the affair. As I sat in the yard, watching the night unfold and the stars twinkle, my initial shock transformed into growing anger. Not only had my beloved wife betrayed me, but she had also deceived me into raising someone else's child, maybe even more than one. If my sole focus were to punish Lola at that moment, I would have stormed into the house, presented her with evidence of blood types, coerced a confession, and cast her out onto the street. But it wasn't that simple. I cherished my children, regardless of their biological origins. If we were to divorce, Lola would likely gain sole custody once the truth about their parentage surfaced. I contemplated and asked myself, what do I truly desire? The answers became surprisingly clear. Firstly, I needed to uncover the truth about Lola's actions. Was it a momentary affair? Was she unaware that Amanda wasn't my biological child? Or did she know everything and engage in a clandestine relationship for years? Secondly, I was determined to raise my children as my own and shield them from the knowledge of my non-biological relationship to them. Once I delineated my objectives, devising a plan to achieve them seemed remarkably straightforward. I returned to the house and discreetly collected cotton swabs from each of the children's cheeks while they slept, labeling Amanda's with a 2 and John's with a 3. Then I headed to the kitchen, swabbed my own cheek, and marked it with a 1. I had a friend who worked in a university chemistry lab, and I arranged for him to conduct DNA tests for me. This marked the initial step, the beginning of gathering crucial information. After receiving my initial response, I knew what to do next. A week later, my friend called me, unaware of the sample's origin. I told him about meeting people with the same surname, leading to discussions about potential distant kinship. He then mentioned that Tim's 2 and 3 were siblings, but the first one wasn't related. This revelation indicated that they weren't cousins, as previously assumed. I thanked him for the information and ended the call. Amanda and John were siblings, sharing the same parents. Lola, on the other hand, had 2 children with an unknown partner. Did she have knowledge of this? She must have been aware of her relations with this individual, but was she cognizant of his paternity over our children? There was a straightforward means to ascertain the truth. Approaching Lola as she washed dishes in the kitchen, I brought up the topic without turning towards her. I began by telling her I had a question, and she encouraged me to continue. I explained the situation regarding my colleague's biologist friend needing DNA samples from relatives. I suggested that we obtain swabs from her, me, and each child, planning to handle the kids before bedtime and take care of ours later. I checked Lola's reaction closely as I spoke. In the middle of my explanation, she tensed, almost dropping a pan before composing herself. After I finished, there was a minute of silence before she turned to face me. Lola expressed her doubts about the idea, questioning how we could be certain about what the biologist would do with the samples or if our privacy would be respected. Despite my attempts to argue, she firmly opposed the idea, insisting that she wasn't interested. She asked me to inform my colleague that we declined to participate. I replied softly, saying it was okay either way. Her reaction conveyed to me what I needed to know. My next step involved uncovering the truth about her affairs: who, where, when, and perhaps why. Although uncertain, searching her home might yield clues. I required time for a thorough search. On Saturday, we planned to visit her parents. Minutes before departure, I pretended to have a work crisis, faked a call, then explained the situation to Lola. She reluctantly agreed, leaving with the children. Now, I had hours to meticulously comb through the house systematically. My usual haunts were unnecessary to search. Instead, I focused on Lola's spaces, skipping the kitchen, bookshelves, and living room. I disregarded my own areas, but meticulously combed through her closet and dresser. The discovery of hidden lingerie hinted at secrets. Only the children's rooms and the attic remained to be explored. Concluding that the children's rooms were less promising, I ventured into the attic. Inside, I found assorted old furniture, a few lamps, and numerous boxes of items predating our marriage. Realizing the enormity of the task, I scrutinized the area. Notably, one of the 3 nearby boxes appeared less dusty and had been recently disturbed. Upon closer inspection, I focused on these 3 boxes and uncovered Lola's old belongings, mostly letters from her college days. Among them were letters and souvenirs from me, including cute postcards. Buried at the bottom of one box, hidden under old papers, was a thin stack of recent notes and 2 unnamed videotapes. Extracting them, I found that the tapes contained explicit content, and the notes were from Bob, her boss from the office, which clearly expressed feelings of intimacy. After carefully studying the materials for 20 minutes, it became clear that Lola had betrayed Bob and me. This happened about 3 months before our daughter, Amanda, was conceived, coinciding with Lola's strange behavior at home. The notes revealed Bob's dominance and Lola's submissiveness, devoid of affection and tenderness. They dictated her outfits for various occasions and described in detail their carnal trysts during the late hours of work. Some even made fun of me for not knowing that I was raising their children. It was obvious that Bob had no intention of acknowledging his paternity. My anger grew as I realized the extent of my deception, knowing that Bob was happily married to Caroline, unaware of his infidelity. Although Lola seemed to be consciously involved in this, there was no sign of coercion. She seemed to enjoy her subordinate role. They both seemed to know about their paternity over Lola's children and enjoyed their secret in front of me. These revelations confirmed Lola's deception over the past 6 years, deliberately conceiving children from another man while pretending to be a devoted wife. Exhausted with rage, I decided to take revenge on both Lola and Bob. After a short thought, I turned on the tapes on the VCR and began watching recordings of Bob and Lola doing carnal things. The place on the first entry was probably Bob's house, and on the second, our bedroom, aroused suspicions about Lola's ability to use my business trips for her own purposes. Overall, the recordings confirmed Bob's dominance and Lola's submission. The lighting in the room was not particularly bright, but both images were clearly visible, and the sound quality was surprisingly good, allowing me to hear every word and moan on the first tape. From the very beginning of their affair, I've heard Bob take control. Sitting on the bed, he instructed Lola to do a provocative striptease, which she did with a smile. The intimacy was harsh, devoid of tenderness and affection, and Bob spoke to her harshly. It saddened me to see that Lola seemed to be enjoying this event. The second tape had similar carnal scenes, but included some new and interesting dialogue as they settled down on the bed. Lola asked Bob about his indifference to my parenting of their children, to which he replied that I was a good guy who loved children and didn't worry about the rest. He mentioned that if it wasn't for that, he would have advised her to leave me. Lola objected, asking what I was good at besides changing diapers. She defended me, emphasizing my kindness and love, comparing them to Bob's treatment. She hinted that his rudeness attracted her because it contrasted with my tenderness. Despite this, they continued their meeting before Bob left. After I finished watching both recordings, I pondered their arrogance. It was a shame to realize that not only had they created such evidence, but they had stupidly left it with Bob's notes, where I could find them. My revenge will be comprehensive and aimed at both. I used a scanner to digitize every note on my hard drive. Then, using software from the office for a previous project, I converted each videotape into a digital file on my computer for subsequent editing. When I was done, I hid the tapes in the trunk of my car, hiding them under the spare wheel. I carefully cleaned the attic so that Lola would not discover my presence. Over the next 2 weeks, I consistently implemented my plans. It was much easier than I expected, posing as normal, and nothing unusual happened. It occurred to me that she had deceived me for 6 years, which allowed me to reciprocate her. Despite the fact that I had no desire for her, I continued to show her tenderness, even initiated intimacy, albeit carefully, so that it would be easier for her to refuse. I never wanted to touch her again. An important event in her life awaited Lola. She was chosen as the new president of the Key Society, a significant charitable foundation in our city, and she was to officially take office at a lunch where she was to present her speech on the charity's plans for the coming year. Lola had been on the board of the Kleich Society for 3 years and felt very honored to be appointed president. Worried about her performance, she asked for my help in preparing the PowerPoint presentation she was going to use. It gave me a golden opportunity. During the course of a week, I collaborated with her every evening, allowing her to share her slides and other materials with me, organizing them into a cohesive presentation. She rehearsed this several times in the month leading up to her big day, and it always went smoothly. At the same time, I prepared my own unique PowerPoint presentation, ready to replace hers. The night before the luncheon, I deleted Lola's file and substituted it with mine, adding a lock to prevent her from disabling it once the presentation began. All I needed to ensure was that Lola had extended an invitation to Bob and his wife for dinner. I casually inquired, and she confirmed they would attend on that significant evening. I shared Lola's excitement, though for different reasons. Arriving early, Lola, elegantly clad in a black evening gown, looked stunning. I assisted her in setting up the laptop, conducting a couple of tests to ensure smooth playback. We all relished a fine dinner and enjoyed some initial speeches. Lola was then warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she approached the podium with a blend of timidity and pride. As applause erupted, she commenced her speech and launched the PowerPoint presentation. Initially, it unfolded as expected, showcasing images of the Society's key charitable endeavors and financial breakdowns. Then, as per my plan, it abruptly shifted focus. A sequence of still photos followed, frames I extracted from 2 videos depicting a couple engaged in various carnal acts. While some images were dim, the collective impression of a dozen or so unmistakably featured Lola and Bob. For a few minutes, Lola continued addressing key social issues. Then, amidst a sudden stir among the audience, she turned to the screen behind her. Gasping, she inadvertently knocked over a glass of water onto the podium, momentarily frozen in shock. Soon, a vivid blush spread across her face and neck as she frantically tried to halt the presentation. By then, still photos had transitioned into brief video clips. Bob's voice rang out as he questioned how they would prevent me from discovering that she was carrying his child. He mentioned that, as long as she allowed me occasional closeness, I wouldn't suspect anything. He added that she should remember that she belonged to him. The room erupted in laughter and jeers from all corners. Lola stood transfixed, utterly dumbfounded, and too stunned to even feel embarrassed. At a nearby table, Caroline, Bob's wife, seized a vase of flowers, smashed it over Bob's head, and exited amidst the commotion. As people gradually vacated the ballroom, they cast glances back at Lola, gesturing and reliving the astonishing spectacle. Surprisingly swiftly, Lola and I were left alone. She stood on the podium, defeated and desolate. Sitting at a table 10 feet away, I grinned broadly as I looked up at her. Eventually, she met my eyes wearing an expression of profound sorrow. She questioned how I could betray her and stated that she thought I loved her, which struck me as amusing given the circumstances. I burst into laughter and made my exit, denying any remaining love for her. It wasn't like that at all. It was a delightful fantasy, but entirely implausible. I realized that the entire town would soon learn of Bob's paternity, which could jeopardize my custody of the children in the divorce. Additionally, they would resent being labeled as Lola's illegitimate offspring. I acknowledged that I should have been more subtle in my approach. Taking the initiative, I consulted a divorce attorney and collaborated with them multiple times to draft documents for future use. I then created the exact PowerPoint presentation I had described earlier, but instead of waiting for Lola's dinner event, I presented it to her. One evening, 4 weeks prior to the dinner, after putting the children to bed, I summoned Lola and asked her to review the draft of the PowerPoint I had prepared for her upcoming speech the next month. She snapped, questioning if it could wait because she was exhausted that day. Firmly, I asserted that it couldn't wait, reminding her that I needed to review what changes were necessary so I could make them in time. I mentioned that I did all of this for her in my spare time. I then ushered her into the office and seated her in front of the computer, instructing her to hit the letter A when she was ready. I told her that the file would start on its own, inwardly smiling. I observed her closely. Initially, everything proceeded smoothly as she rehearsed her remarks on the first few slides of the society's presentation. Then she gasped, her face draining of color, as she beheld still images of her and Bob engaged in closeness. Turning to me, mouth agape, she remained silent. I met her gaze impassively. Soon video clips surfaced, featuring conversations about his paternity of her children and her deception of me. As the scenes continued to unfold, Lola desperately tried to stop the file, but I foiled her efforts. Eventually, the screen went dark, and this ordeal lasted about 2 minutes. Lola slouched in her chair, her head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. After a moment, she finally spoke, lifting her head to look at me. In that instant, she seemed to age 20 years. Tim, me. Oh, Tim, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I'm truly sorry. Can you ever forgive me? Forgive you, I retorted coldly. For what? Let's see. For having an affair with Bob Dorner, which apparently spanned our entire 6-year marriage. For bearing him 2 children while leading me to believe they were mine. For mocking me and disrespecting me behind my back. For denying me closeness at Bob's behest. Is that what you want forgiveness for? Her sobs intensified. Tim, I don't love him. You're the one I love, the one I've always loved. My anger simmered, restrained. I said nothing, but internally I thought, no, Lola, that's nonsense. You love our lifestyle. You appreciate how I cater to your needs, care for the children, but you don't love me. No woman who loves her husband would behave so deceitfully. I reclined, allowing her tears to flow. I relished her distress, maintaining silence during the 20 minutes it took for her to cry. Eventually, she sniffled several times, wiped her face, and looked at me. What will you do, Tim? Are you going to divorce me? No, Lola, I won't. I lied. I care too much about Amanda and John, even if they aren't biologically mine. I let the words linger before continuing. But things will change drastically from now on. You can count on that. Let's begin immediately. Call that idiot Bob and tell him to be here in 15 minutes. She stared at me, horror evident on her face. But I can't do that. He's at home with his wife and kids. I grinned. Say whatever you must, but get him here. Let him know if he doesn't show up within 15 minutes, his marriage will be over by tomorrow. She hesitated, perhaps unsettled by the coldness in my demeanor. Without uttering another word, she headed to the kitchen and dialed her lover. When Bob arrived, he wore the insincere smile I anticipated. Lola must have briefed him on the situation, for he appeared anxious and apprehensive. "Come into the office and take a seat, Bob, and you too, Lola. We have something to discuss," I directed. As we settled, I wasted no time. "Okay, Bob, here's the deal. You've been enjoying yourself with Lola for quite some time, making me out to be a fool. That ends now. Everything has changed, and it's time for you to face the consequences." He began to respond, but I silenced him. "Sit, watch, and listen." I scrolled through the PowerPoint presentation and relished his horrified reaction to its contents. When the presentation ended, a prolonged, unexpected silence ensued. Strangely, I found myself enjoying it more than they did. "Now you'll do exactly as I say without question, or your seemingly blissful marriage to Caroline will abruptly and publicly come to an end. Understand? Don't speak, just nod," I instructed. He begrudgingly nodded, his expression seething with anger. "Good. Listen carefully and keep quiet. I have several documents for you to sign. I'll give them to you one by one. You may want your lawyer to review them, so I'm giving you 48 hours to return them signed. Otherwise, Caroline will be invited to view a brief video clip. The first document acknowledges that you are the biological father of Amanda and John and commits you to pay child support until they turn 21, along with a lump sum for their college education. The amounts are specified here: $10,000 per child per year, plus $100,000 per child upon their first year of college. The funds will be placed in a trust fund, of which I am the sole trustee, with authority to utilize it for the children's needs," I explained. Bob erupted from his chair in fury. "Listen, Tim, this is utterly ridiculous. I have no intention." I forcefully pushed him back into his seat. "Shut the hell up, Bob. You, Tim. This is utterly ridiculous. I have no intention." I forcefully pushed him back into his seat. "Shut the hell up, Bob. You're wealthy, and we both know it. This isn't your show anymore. It's mine, and you have no choice. Now keep quiet until I give you permission to speak," I commanded. Across the room, I noticed Lola looking at me with a horrified expression. This was a side of her devoted husband she had never witnessed before. "The second document grants me permission to adopt the children. You and Lola will need to sign it. The third document entails your permanent renouncement of parental rights to Amanda and John, pledging never to disclose your paternity to anyone. And lastly, a personal admission that you exploited my wife in the workplace, coercing her into an affair," I continued. "What?" Bob exploded once more. "That's a complete fabrication. She wanted it as much as I did." "Sit down, Bob," I ordered sternly. "Maybe, but Lola will still file a complaint of violence against you. It's one of my conditions not to divorce her. Do you understand, Lola?" I asked, turning to her. She looked fearfully between Bob and me, not answering. "Let me get this straight," I told them both. "I have no intention of using these documents yet. Consider them my insurance policy, Bob, in case you ever decide to evade your financial obligations to our children, or suddenly decide to reveal their true origins to others," I added, handing Lola the ready-made accusation. "Sign it, Lola," I ordered firmly. She did it in silence, still looking scared. "Now, Bob, we're almost done with your part of today's meeting. I expect these documents back in my possession within 48 hours. You can bring them here, and if you're entertaining silly thoughts like harming me, be sure that copies of your incriminating correspondence with Lola are in safe vaults, ready to come out if necessary," I concluded, looking at him contemptuously. "Any questions?" Taking Lola by the hand, I led her back to the office and sat her down. I had never seen her in such a state before. She was trembling with terror. "It's okay, Lola, I'll never hurt you. You don't need to be afraid," I assured her. "God, Tim, what happened to you? How could you do that, Bob?" she exclaimed. I examined it with some surprise. You really don't understand, Lola. Don't you understand that what he did to you, to us, is malicious and unfair? She blushed. Yes, of course. That's clear. Well, you're so fierce. It feels like you've lost your mind, she continued. I was silent for a moment, not sure how to react. Lola, I already promised you that I would not divorce you. However, our marriage will inevitably change. Do you understand it? I asked. Yes, Tim. I will do whatever it takes to redeem myself. But what have I done to you? She begged. Okay, I agree. Let's set some conditions. You'll find a new job within 2 weeks. I'm not going to let you keep seeing Bob at work every day. It should be obvious, but you shouldn't have any personal interaction with Bob. No touching, kissing, love affairs, calls, letters, nothing. I explained. Moreover, if our marriage continues, it will be based on completely different principles. I do not tolerate your bad temper, coldness, and indifference. I expect you to be a cheerful, kind, and loving wife every day. By your actions, prove your love and appreciation for marrying me, giving up the wild, unstoppable charm that you shared only with Bob. I hope to see you in the sexy lingerie that you hide in your drawer. I expect you to be passionate and ready for intimacy. If you really love me, Lola, you have a lot of lost time to compensate for, I stressed. She crossed the room and knelt in front of me, hugging my legs tightly. I love you, Tim, more than words can express, and I will prove it to you, she said, crying. I watched her pale, tear-stained face and frightened eyes. Somewhere inside me, there were still traces of the love and devotion that I once felt for this woman with whom we shared so much. However, they were eclipsed and became insignificant due to my irritation with her selfishness and hypocrisy. She deserves whatever consequences befall her, I thought. Softening my voice, I said, Listen, Lola, in 4 weeks we will have an important social dinner. Let's use this time to start over, maybe improve our marriage. If all goes well, this dinner will be an opportunity to celebrate the success of our new efforts. Do you agree? She nodded, hugging me tighter. Yes, Tim, thanks for giving me a chance. I'll be whatever you want me to be. Give me 10 minutes to fix my makeup, and I'll start fixing the situation, she promised, rising with a smile. When she left the room, I lay down in an armchair, amused by Lola's efforts to please me. The next 4 weeks were going to be very funny. I was a little surprised that she didn't notice what I didn't do. I did not discuss the details of the connection or its origin. The whole evening was probably a deep shock for her, leaving no time for reflection. But I wasn't really interested in it because I just didn't care. My relationship with Lola ended, even though she didn't know about it. Upon entering the bedroom a few minutes later, I found a neatly made bed, dim lights, and Lola, lying on her side in a revealing red nightgown after her grooming procedures. She looked amazing, as beautiful as ever, but visibly nervous. I noticed a bottle of lube on the bedside table. In a seductive but trembling voice, she asked where I was and invited me to her, holding out her hands. I quickly undressed and hugged her. Our kisses ignited passion, her body radiated warmth, and she writhed with impatience. Whether it was playful or not, I enjoyed the moment, putting aside my anger and disgust for Lola to give in to pleasure with her. Her charm and impatience were admirable, especially after years of indifference. Surrendering to her department, I lay on my back, allowing her to take control. Afterwards, she turned off the light and settled down next to me under the blanket. She kissed me gently on the neck and wished me good night. Falling into a contented sleep, I looked forward to receiving similar attention over the next 4 weeks. I enjoyed the following weeks with great pleasure as Lola devoted herself to rebuilding our marriage. The next morning, she woke me up with a joyful smile and a loving kiss, offering me a treat before breakfast. I watched as she went beyond the usual routine to prepare the children for their day. In the evening, she cooked an unusual dish according to the recipe from the book, although the children preferred their usual food. Lola urged them to take a bath and go to bed on time so that we could enjoy the evening together. Our daily intimacy was a pleasant change from before. Lola put on her nightgown again, and we indulged in leisurely caresses. Her enthusiasm, affection, and energy remained constant. Despite my hidden feelings, I couldn't ignore the appearance of happiness that we radiated every day. Lola's caring attention continued in the morning and behind closed doors. My life seemed like a happy fairy tale, although without trust in my wife, and the grown-up anger hiding under the facade of contentment. Bob's signed papers arrived immediately, and I quickly obtained Lola's consent to the adoption, completing the process through a private hearing organized by my lawyer within 10 days. Then my lawyer got involved in the divorce. One morning at work, I was unexpectedly visited by Denise Reynolds, a colleague with whom I sometimes collaborate. At 28, she was 5 years younger than me and gorgeous, although I knew she was divorced, and her sometimes arousing remarks did not go unnoticed. I never considered her anything other than one of the women I fantasize about. In my dreams, I expected that Denise's visit would be related to work, but it turned out otherwise. "Tim," she said, "has something changed with you lately? You seem, I do not know, younger or in better shape or something like that." "Thanks for the compliment, Denise," I replied with a smile. "In fact, everything is completely different, but it is inappropriate to discuss it here. Maybe we can have lunch together today." "That sounds good," she agreed. We went to a restaurant with a salad bar, and then settled down at an outdoor table and enjoyed the sun. "The change you've noticed in me is probably due to my failed marriage," I explained. She looked confused. "And does that make you a better person? Please clarify." I gave her a short version of the story. "A couple of weeks ago, I discovered that my wife was dating a colleague. This has been going on for some time. I met with him so that he would leave her alone. And since then, she has been trying to correct her mistake in front of me. Here's a secret for you, Denise. Lola thinks she can bring me back, but I've already decided that I'm going to leave her soon. I can't stay with someone who betrayed me. Meanwhile, she treats me like a king, both in and out of bed. This is the change you noticed today," I concluded, and she assessed me with her eyes. "I'm impressed with how well you're doing," she said. When I found out that my ex-husband was cheating, I almost collapsed. It took me several months to come to my senses. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you'd been through this too, but I'm in control of my situation now. Everything will turn out the way I want it to, and not according to someone else's scenario. It makes me feel much better." Taking another chance, I added, "One good thing about my situation is that although I'm not officially single yet, I know I'm going to be one soon. So I don't have to hide my admiration for the beautiful lady sitting with me in the park today," I said, smiling at her. She blushed slightly, turned away, and then looked at me again. "Damn it, Tim, you've put me in an awkward position," she said. "I didn't think it was that simple." "I'm sorry, Denise, but you're so beautiful and funny. I've been attracted to you since we met. It's just that it's been forbidden to discuss it until now. Do you have a chance to join me for dinner on Saturday? I know a lovely Italian place with a view of the river." She looked at me seriously. "Tim, I love you too, and it's always been easy with you. Can I trust you? Is your marriage really over? Or is this just a trick to get into my bed? I'm sorry for my skeptical attitude, but I've seen this situation before. Denise, I've always been honest with you, and as you know, I've never asked much of you. I'm ending my relationship with Lola in about 2 weeks and filing for divorce on the same day. There's no turning back, but I understand if you want to distance yourself. I'm just a little disappointed." She smiled. "No, Tim, now that you've proposed, I'm ready to accept it before you change your mind." She looked at me with fixed eyes, and after some hesitation, I approached and we shared a light, gentle kiss. It wasn't fiery or passionate, but it seemed like a wonderful promise. When we parted, I couldn't help but smile and felt like a happy child. When I told my wife about the date on Saturday night, he brought out the cruelest side of me. I frankly stated that I would be dating another woman and expected her to stay at home with the children. Lola was stunned and on the verge of tears. "Tim," she protested, "but I tried so hard. Please think of something to save our marriage. How can you date someone else?" "It's pretty simple, Lola. Not only were you dating someone else, but you also had a 6-year affair behind my back. Although you've been trying hard lately and I've gotten better, that doesn't mean you automatically deserve my unwavering loyalty. Clearly, I'll have to look for pleasure elsewhere for a while before we're on the same wavelength." Her tears began to flow. "Will you sleep with her?" "No, but I could. And that's what you need to understand. If it hurts you, well, that's a piece of how you made me feel." With that, I left the room, ending the conversation. Our first meetings with Denise were delightful, but careful. We were moving slowly, perhaps both of them. We felt that there was something more between us than just physical attraction. We talked, laughed, sympathized with colleagues, exchanged stories about childhood, and just learned about each other. It was easy and natural, and sometimes reminded me of my first days with Lola. This thought upset me, but I pushed it aside. After the third dinner, when I was opening Denise's car door in front of her apartment, she gently asked if I would like to come in. We both took the hint, and I felt a sudden attraction. As soon as we were inside, she dissolved into my embrace, and we kissed and hugged like teenagers in love. Retreating slightly, she confessed to me that she really wanted to do this, but she was quite nervous because it had been a long time. She confessed to me that she really wants it, but she's pretty nervous because it's been a long time. She asked me to be gentle and patient. I assured her with a smile, lifted her hands, and asked which way to go to her bedroom. Then I thought that making love with Denise was incredible, but it was noticeably different from the last meetings with Lola. She started a little timidly, letting me explore and caress her body. And yet she was so amazing that every moment with her was pure pleasure. Our first carnal contact was gentle, affectionate, and much more loving than the passionate dates with Lola. It seemed like two people taking care of each other, bringing each other happiness. After that, Denise kissed me many times and asked if I could stay the night. I gladly agreed, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, she seemed a little confused again, and although we didn't make love, we said goodbye with real tenderness, exchanging a few tender kisses. There were only a few days left before the planned wedding with Lola, and I hid my intentions from Denise, but mentioned that my divorce would be finalized soon. When I got home around 9:30 a.m. on Saturday, I found Lola crying quietly at the kitchen table, obviously realizing how I had spent the previous night. Imitating sympathy more than sincere feeling, I hugged her tenderly. "I'm sorry, Lola. I understand how you feel," I whispered. "Oh, Tim, this is just terrible. The thought of you with another woman tears me apart. I've been so selfish all these years. How could I be so indifferent to your feelings?" Looking at me gratefully, she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a second chance." Lola's significant night, like mine, was approaching with rapidity. To some degree, I almost regretted it. The past 4 weeks spent with Lola, characterized by an incredibly intimate connection, were pleasurable, and I will miss them. However, nothing she did manage to diminish my deep-seated resentment and anger. Her complete betrayal far exceeded any attempts at reconciliation. Upon reflecting on my sentiments, I realized there was only a small fraction of love left for her, coupled with a minute trace of sympathy for what lay ahead. While collaborating on a PowerPoint presentation for her speech, I secretly prepared my own version, not entirely identical to hers, as I needed to conceal Bob's identity as the father of our children. Nevertheless, the overall approach mirrored hers, with a sequence of photos followed by captivating videos. I covertly rigged the laptop so that Lola's presentation would play whenever she used it. However, by inputting a specific key combination, including a passphrase, I could lock her presentation and substitute it with my unique file. In the days leading up to the event, and on the evening itself, Lola anxiously inquired if I had deleted the dreadful file she stumbled upon 4 weeks ago. Each time, with a loving smile, I assured her it was gone and demonstrated that her presentation was intact on the laptop. The last few days at home held a particular sweetness. Lola started to feel more secure in winning me back, and her affectionate gestures appeared less desperate yet more serene. The pain she endured when I spent the entire night with Denise only heightened her presence in our bed. Knowing that this charade was nearing its end, I savored every moment. When the grand night arrived, we arrived early, with me dressed in a rented tuxedo and Lola looking stunning in a black evening dress, with delicate spaghetti straps that accentuated her neck and shoulders. We tested her PowerPoint presentation twice to ensure everything was in order. As she leaned over to place her purse under the podium, I swiftly input the key combination, signaling that everything was set, and everything unfolded precisely as I had anticipated. We enjoyed a pleasant dinner, engaging in amiable conversation with our table companions. Then Lola was warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she nervously approached the podium amidst applause. According to my watch, her joy and anticipation lasted a mere 54 seconds. That was the length of time it took for still photos of her infidelity to appear on the screen. Lola didn't freeze or spill her water, but she turned to me, stricken with horror and disbelief, before futilely attempting to halt the presentation. Naturally, she failed. As the video clips played and the audience reacted with a mix of indignation and laughter, she stood there, flushed and defeated, making no attempt to respond to the vulgar remarks directed at her. Moments later, we were alone. I sat quietly, observing her from across the table. Finally, she uttered the question straight from my daydreams. "Tim, how could you do this to me? I thought you loved me." "Yes, Lola," I replied. "For these past few weeks, I loved you just as much as you loved me 6 years ago." Approaching the podium, I placed several folded papers in her hand. "I'm filing for divorce. Consider yourself served. If you choose to stay in town, we will have joint custody of Amanda and John. Otherwise, I will fight for full custody, and you know I will win." Almost at the door, I heard her scream in anguish and fury. "But you promised you wouldn't divorce me. You said we could work things out." Turning back to face her, I responded, "Yes, Lola. So I suppose, after all these years of your deception, I lied to myself."